Good evening, wanderer of stories. Tonight you slip through the heavy wooden door of a mortuary workshop where candlelight dances on stone walls coated in centuries of soot. The air is cool and still as a mausoleum, and shadows pool around the workbenches like silent attendants. Find a comfortable spot, allow your shoulders to soften, and let the steady rhythm of your breath guide you towards stillness. While you settle in, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy my work. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what hour glows on your clock. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You stand at the threshold of a silent world that thrived long before antiseptics or modern mortuary schools. In ancient Egypt, embalmers braided natron into linen strips as naturally as you might braid hair today. A practice passed down through families for 1,000 years, securing bodies for their voyage to the afterlife. You probably won't survive this assignment yet. Here you are summoned by curiosity. The chamber's entrance is framed by a cracked stone lintel carved with hieroglyphs that still boast vibrant traces of blue pigment despite 3 millennia of wind and sand. Your fingertips graze the cool surface of the work table, worn smooth by generations of hands. The faint scent of beeswax lingers from sealing jars of aromatic resins, offering a gentle contrast to the sterile chill. Historians still argue whether early embalmers used frankincense purely for ritual significance or partly to mask the odor of decay. In one corner you notice a stack of wooden pallets once used to mix pigments for tomb paintings, now stained with ochre and cinnamon, a quirky detail that suggests even in death there was room for artistry. You step deeper into the room where lantern light flickers against rows of stone basins. Some hold shallow pools, still tinged with rust and traces of alkali salts. These vessels stand as mute witnesses to the miracle of preservation that ancient artisans perfected over centuries. You might imagine parasites crawling along the edges if you weren't so focused on the hush and the texture of the cold stone beneath your palm. No modern Ziploc bag could replicate this slow alchemy of drying and embalming. Around you, framed sketches and faded papyrus scrolls line the walls. One scroll details the ritual purification of the chest cavity, a mainstream fact that embalmers removed internal organs and stored them in canopic jars balanced on the chest of the deceased. Nearby, a crude doodle shows a cat-headed priest sprinkling resin with exaggerated solemnity, a fringe tidbit that reveals even scribblings of ancient morticians sometimes veered into humour. Remember that cat dung sunscreen pigment you heard about last week? Well, this is on a whole other level of resourcefulness. Your foot brushes the uneven flagstone floor, echoing softly in the cavernous chamber. The silence presses in around you like a soft shroud. Somewhere beyond the thick walls, a distant drip of water marks time in slow, deliberate pulses. You inhale the faint tang of preserved linen and resin while exhaling any tension lodged in your shoulders. This is no ordinary workshop of wood and metal, but a crossroads between life and what comes after. As your eyes adjust to the glow of lanterns, you notice a low bench lined with stone mortars and pestles. These simple tools ground spices and herbs once thought capable of halting decay before modern chemistry arrived. Some scholars still debate whether myrrh offered real preservative power or if it was purely symbolic of rebirth. Mixing the powders must have felt like performing magic whispered across generations. You step past the bench and press your palm against a polished marble slab cooler than anything you've ever touched. Here bodies lay supine for the first stages of drying before heavier treatments commenced. The slab's surface is pitted with tiny holes that once held metal pegs to help position limbs. An embalmer's workshop had to manage anatomy with the precision of a sculptor and the tenderness of a healer. Yet, with a wink of dark humour, imagine applying jagged tools to a corpse and cracking a joke about forgetting to send birthday cards. Listen as your breathing steadies in time with the lantern flames. The quiet hum you feel isn't from any mortal instrument, but from the collective memory of thousands of embalmers who learned their craft by candlelight. You drift past the basins, the palette stains, the pedestals and the jars, each holding echoes of a life once lived. There's a thrill in knowing that every flat stone and wooden beam in this chamber has witnessed farewells both tragic and absurd. You pause at the center of the room where a stone basin remains half filled with pale yellow fluid. The scent is faint but unmistakable, a mingling of salt and resin so powerful it feels like time itself congealed here. Imagine dipping your hands into that bath, knowing you're part of an unbroken chain stretching back thousands of years. You might picture yourself as one of those ancient artisans scraped of preconceptions, scraping away what remains of flesh and ego alike. A single dusty beam of moonlight leaks through a narrow slit in the wall, illuminating motes drifting like tiny ghosts. Each mote is a reminder that even in the stillness of death, there is motion. You inhale again, noticing how the cool air stirs around your chest. The mortuary chamber breathes with secrets you may never fully decode, but will carry with you all the same. Your pulse slows. The world outside this workshop with its rush and distraction fades. Here you stand in communion with those who coaxed life's final form into a semblance of permanence. In this quiet pause you understand why embalmers were revered and feared, both healers and gatekeepers. Historians still argue whether they held true spiritual power or simply mastered biology before it was called science. Let the rhythm of your breath guide you onward as the lanterns dim and the stone seems to sigh under your weight. Ahead lie more tools, more fluids, more stories waiting to unravel beneath your curious fingertips. For now, in this hushed chamber of memory and mixture, allow every sense to settle. You step from the hushed stone chamber into a narrower alcove where long wooden racks display the gleam of metal tools like a sinister orchestra waiting to play. Your gloved fingers brush against the smooth curve of a leather gauntlet, its surface dimpled and worn from centuries of handling. In medieval Europe, embalmers applied early forms of leather gloves, stitched by specialized craftsmen. A mainstream fact that reminds you even protective gear was once a luxury. You slide each finger in, enjoying the weight of the gauntlets as they hug your hands. Before you lies a neatly arranged row of scalpels, whose blades arc like crescent moons, iron tempered with charcoal fires long since extinguished. You lift one by its bone-inlaid handle and feel the cool resistance of solid metal. The handle was carved from cartilaginous ribs of farm animals, a quirky tidbit passed down in guild anecdotes, meant to honor the cycle of life and death in a single tool. As you cradle the scalpel, you note the slight burr along the edge where a medieval smith once tested its sharpness on linen. You reach for a scraper, a flat, spoon-like implement with a serrated rim designed to loosen tissue from bone. Its name in ancient texts, Australis, sounds almost comical to modern ears, yet spoke to its deadly precision. Historians still argue whether embalmers used the serrated edge primarily to expedite work or to collect fine shavings for ritual powders. You might imagine apprentices arguing over that centuries ago, much like interns today bicker about coffee machines. You pause to run your thumb along the cool haft of a long probe tipped with a hooked end. This tool was used to lift organs from the thoracic cavity without piercing the heart. A surgical finesse documented in 12th century Greco-Roman manuals that shaped embalming practice for a millennium. As you lift the probe, a soft scrape echoes against wood, a reminder that the alcove itself is a resonance chamber for every clink and whisper of iron. There's a bowl of sharpened flints beside a stub of polished obsidian that glints like a raven's wing. Some fringe accounts claim embalmers favoured volcanic glass for incisions to minimize contamination, a story whose truth remains as sharp as the blade itself. You might cringe at the idea of sliding obsidian into flesh, yet marvel at the commitment to preservation before stainless steel existed. You run through the sequence you'll follow once a body lies supine on the mortuary table. First, the scalpel. A single smooth cut along the ribcage, recalling that embalming manuals from Renaissance Italy advised opening the thorax from left to right to avoid nicking the diaphragm. You imagine the tension in your gloved hand as the blade parts linen wrappings and skin alike, each slice measured and deliberate. Next comes the scraper, which you cradle like a painter's palette knife. You picture using it to dislodge stubborn flesh from bone crevices, an act as intimate as archaeologists exhuming ancient skeletons. The scrape might sound gruesome if you listen too closely, yet here it feels no less soothing than the stroke of a brush against canvas. You reach for a slender, hooked elevator designed to maneuver organs through narrow cavities. The textural contrast between the smooth metal shaft and its hooked tip feels uncanny under your glove. Embalmers in 17th century France refined this design to reduce tearing, a mainstream fact whispered in dusty tomes at medical schools. You inhale the faint scent of oiled metal and leather, a fragrance somewhere between a tack room and a craftsman's workshop. On a lower shelf you discover a small vial of powdered aloes and myrrh, ready to be mixed with resins. A quirky detail tucked into a monastery chronicle claims some embalmers added bits of ambergris to the mixture because they believed its rarity would appease spirits of the departed. Imagine black market ambergris traded like forbidden spices, the dead fragranced in luxury. As you collect your instruments, you sense a quiet responsibility settle in your chest. Each tool carries the weight of every hand that ever held it, from apprentices trembling at their first incision to master embalmers confident in their lifelong craft. A crack in the woodwork above releases a soft patter of dust and old plaster. Historians still argue whether that plaster came from collapsed cathedrals recycled at mortuaries or from purpose-built workshops. Either way, you're standing under centuries of layered history. You arrange your tools on a shallow tray lined with soft cloth stained faintly with old embrocations. The subtle pattern of wax and resin visited your fingertips as you adjust each implement in perfect order. There's a natural rhythm to this preparation. Gloves on, tray set, instruments aligned, resins ready to blend. Your heartbeat slows as you sink into the ritual. Beyond the alcove, you hear the distant drip from the main chamber, like an ancient clock marking time for nameless souls. You close your eyes for a moment, imagining the next steps. Sliding the body onto the table, making the first incision, the give of flesh beneath the edge of your blade. But for now, you remain in this pocket of anticipation, fingertips brushing cold steel, breathing in the scent of leather and metal so familiar to every embalmer who came before. The alcove's torchlight flickers, and you notice shadows dance across a faded mural depicting a procession of death gods, each figure holding scales or flutes. Some say embalmers painted these murals to remind themselves that death could be both solemn and absurd. You might smile imagining a god with a trumpet measuring souls by the length of their nose. You ready a small whetstone and begin the gentle wetting of each blade. The rasp of stone on steel makes a sound like distant rainfall on lead roofs, soft, constant, and oddly tranquil. With each pass, you sharpen the edge until the blade sings when drawn across a test piece of linen. This simple act of sharpening transforms a piece of cold metal into an extension of your own will. As you replace the scalpel and scraper on the cloth, you feel strangely calm. The alcove's narrow space, the focus on detail, the communion with centuries of craftsmen, all combine into a quiet meditation. In this ritual lies the heart of embalming, respect for the form beneath the flesh, and reverence for the hands that guide the blade. A gentle breeze drifts through a cracked window slit, stirring the edges of your cloth tray. You inhale the cool night air mingled with the tang of metal and resin. In that moment, the world contracts to the space between you, your gloves, and the gleaming row of instruments. Soon you will move the work table into position, lay out linen strips soaked in salts, and begin the slow art of preservation. Each tool in your tray has a precise role, a measured purpose. And now you understand why embalmers were part surgeon, part artist, and part philosopher of mortality. Historians still argue whether their craft was more scientific or spiritual, but you feel both threads woven into every handle and blade. With a final glance at the alcove's solemn collection, you lift the tray and step back toward the mortuary bench. The next moment will be the first touch of metal on cloth and skin, a breathless threshold into the work itself. For now, you carry these instruments with deliberate care, ready to transform lifeless forms through methodical grace. You step into a narrow corridor, adjoining the mortuary chamber, where rows of glass jars glint like pale eyes in the lantern light. A warm breath of air carries a complex bouquet, the acrid sting of formaldehyde, the sweet undernote of cedar oil, and the faint whisper of scorched bone. Your senses expand to drink in every nuance as if time itself has slowed to let you savor this moment. In 19th century Europe, embalmers pioneered the use of formaldehyde solutions to replace the older saline baths. A mainstream fact that revolutionized preservation and kept bodies looking lifelike far longer than crude salt alone. You inhale, detecting that characteristic bite of chemical vapor, sharp enough to wake the mind yet strangely lulling in the steady glow of lamp oil. You might almost imagine you're standing in a lab, except here the subject of study never breathes again. To your left, a barrel of cedarwood shavings sits stacked against the wall. Fringe lore claims embalmers once slipped small sachets of these fragrant curls into coffin linings so that mourners would remember the scent as an emblem of immortality. Whether that's fact or fanciful marketing remains uncertain, yet you can't help smiling at the notion of a cedar-scented farewell gift. You draw closer to a large chest of drawers, each hidden compartment holding a different aromatic compound. One drawer yields vials of clove oil, bundled in papyrus strips. Historians still argue whether clove's antibacterial properties were its true appeal, or if embalmers simply liked the smell of holiday baking carried into the realm of the dead. You uncork a tiny vial and a breath of sharp, spicy vapours floods your nostrils. It's a sudden contrast to the underlying metallic tang of preservation fluid. Across the corridor, a shallow metal basin overflows with ash. Wood ash, from pyres once used to dehydrate bodies in ancient Greek rituals, a mix of carbon and mineral salts left after the fire's purge. Archaeological findings confirm that some embalmers used ash as an abrasive, gently rubbing it over skin to accelerate drying, a mainstream fact drawn from tomb excavations in Crete. You wet your gloved fingertip and swirl it through the ash. The powder clings to your glove, rough against the smooth leather. The sensation is oddly comforting, like kneading dough before baking. Beyond the ash basin, you see a low table holding rows of ceramic jars, each sealed with wax and bearing labels written in elegant script. One reads, "Spikenard mixture, another dragon's blood compound," though the contents are neither reptilian nor incendiary. A quirky detail tucked in an old mortuary ledger notes that embalmers sometimes called resins dragon's blood to evoke awe and keep apprentices from registering their bewilderment. You rotate the jar in your hand, feeling the weight of centuries. You notice a faint hiss as you lift the lid on a jar marked arsenical paste. In the 17th century, embalmers mixed arsenic with lime and oil to form a paste applied under the skin. A mainstream fact that kept decay at bay, but also granted morticians an unnerving reputation. You draw in a cautious breath at the thought, picturing clandestine meetings where they traded secret recipes in candlelit back rooms. Your path leads you to a tall shelf lined with leather-bound ledgers. One open volume describes the proportions for spirits of turpentine, equal parts turpentine and wine to aid penetration of tissues. Scholars still debate whether wine's alcohol content aided preservation or merely softened the solution's pungency. You trace a fingertip along the script, imagining an embalmer's quill skipping across the page as scribbles of measurement blur into poetic asides. A warming draught stirs the corridor as you pass a brazier filled with glowing coals. Several glass retorts filled with aromatic oils hang from iron hooks above the embers. You hear a gentle drip as vapours condense and fall into a catch basin below. This slow distillation resembles alchemy more than modern chemistry. A fringe anecdote claims that some embalmers believed the resulting essences could induce prophetic dreams in those mourning, though no reputable source confirms whether this is medical fact or merely wishful thinking. You pause to breathe in the hum of activity around you. The corridor is the lifeblood of the mortuary workshop, where each scent marks a stage in the careful choreography of preservation. The formaldehyde's tingle sharpens your awareness. The cedarwood soothes your mind. The clove oil enlivens your senses, and the ash grounds you in tactile reality. Each aroma forms a layered tapestry that seduces and unsettles in equal measure. A soft scuff of leather echoes as you turn a corner and find a small alcove where flasks of alcohol stand arrayed like crystal sentinels. Embalmers often used ethanol to wash muscles after saline baths, a mainstream fact documented in 18th century surgical manuals. You uncork one flask and raise it to your lips. No, not to taste, but to inhale. The vapor bites gently at your throat, then softens into a fleeting warmth at the back of your nasal passages. On a nearby shelf, you spy an ebony box containing packets of narcissus oil, sometimes called flowers of oblivion. Fringe poets once claimed embalmers infused corpses with these blooms to ease the journey into the afterlife, like a final floral thank you note. You can smell a hint of sweetness through the wooden slats, a whisper of spring memories in this otherwise solemn place. Your gloves still bear flecks of ash and resin as you move toward a towering iron rack drunk with the brilliance of coloured liquids. You see verdigris-tinged vats holding copper sulfate solutions once used to strengthen linen, another mainstream innovation found in 18th century texts. You lean closer and note a faint metallic shimmer on the surface. Imagine linen strips steeped in this solution, then wrapped tight around a pharaoh's sarcophagus. Every scent merges in your mind as you stand at the corridor's end. The hissing of oils, the halo of aldehydes, the powdery brush of ash, the sweet teas of florals, all blend into something greater than the sum of its parts. Your breathing slows as you inhale deeply, allowing the complex aroma to fill your lungs and calm your thoughts. In this olfactory tapestry, you sense the meticulous hands that mixed each compound, the secret recipes passed behind locked doors, the apprentices fumbling with flasks in the half-light. Historians still argue whether these aromatic rituals were primarily scientific or spiritual acts, but you feel the reverence behind each measured pinch of powder. A single drop of distilled rosewater beads on the floor, a final reminder that even in this domain of death, embalmers cherished beauty. You watch it roll into a dark pool, then blink as the corridor seems to exhale around you. Your pulse eases, and you realize the scents have guided you through a sensory rite of passage. Ahead lies the main chamber once more, where fluids will meet flesh and rituals will come full circle. But for now, you remain in this fragrant vestibule, carried on the breath of alchemy and the weight of tradition. You step through an arched doorway into a long gallery, where glass jars line both stone walls like silent congregation. Their crystal surfaces capture lantern light and scatter it into prismatic motes that dance across the vaulted ceiling. Your footsteps echo softly on flagstone, and the air here feels heavier, thick with memory and the faint chill of preserved flesh. You walk slowly, letting your gaze drift over row upon row of jars filled with misty fluids. In one, a heart floats suspended, its muscle fibers still discernible in the pale amber liquid. Ancient embalmers in early Persia pioneered heart preservation to honor the soul's seat, a mainstream fact drawn from medical papyri discovered near Susa. You lean closer, noticing tiny bubbles clinging to the organ's surface like pearls. The dull glow of the fluid refracts around them, giving the heart an otherworldly allure. Adjacent sits a jar containing a brain bathed in dark green solution. You inhale the fetid sweetness of glycerin, mixed with alkaloids that modern chemistry would later refine. A fringe anecdote claims some embalmers added opium tincture to brain fluids, believing it eased the deceased's passage through the underworld. Whether this is truth or myth, historians still argue whether opium was used ceremonially or simply to keep vials from smelling rancid. Your fingers rest lightly on the cool rim of a jar, holding a pair of lungs. Their spongy texture appears oddly inviting despite context. You remember the first time you saw lung tissue under a microscope and gasped at its delicate lacework. Here it floats intact. Skeletal membranes turned translucent by ethanol baths, perfected in 19th century anatomy theatres. A mainstream detail that underscores how mortuary science and medical research often shared tools and techniques. You hear the soft drip of condensation from overhead stones and feel a solitary bead of water trace down the side of a jar before splashing onto the floor with a muted plop. Each drop echoes like a metronome against the silence. You notice a small label on another jar that reads, "Thymus gland of Lady Marine," with the date scratched roughly beside it. A quirky record from a medieval convent suggests embalmers preserved certain organs separately for women of noble birth as keepsakes for grieving families. The idea seems macabre, yet oddly tender, like gifting grief wrapped in glass. As you continue, you pass a massive barrel turned on its side, its mouth sealed with a heavy stone lid stained with dark fluid. Inside, faint shapes suggest multiple organs piled together. A mass embalming for bulk anonymized remains after plague outbreaks in Renaissance Florence. Historians still debate whether these mass jar burials were hygienic measures or crude cost-saving tactics by overwhelmed mortuary guilds. You imagine the scene of frantic embalmers racing to stanch decay during those harrowing years. Your lantern casts shifting shadows on the jars, making the organs seem to drift closer and farther as you move. You come upon a specimen of a fetal skeleton curled inside a slender flask. The bones are delicate, ivory white, arranged almost artistically. You recall reading that embalmers sometimes preserved miscarried or stillborn infants separately, a practice documented in 18th century parish records. Some fringe reports claim these jars were displayed in family chapels as a symbol of hope for future children. Whether that stems from reverence or superstition remains a matter of scholarly debate. You pause to study a slender vial containing a single tooth suspended in colourless oil. It glints like a gem mounted for display. The tooth belonged to a beloved saint whose relics drew pilgrims by the thousands. Embalmers occasionally traded body parts as relics for donations to their workshops, a mainstream fact that speaks to the intersection of faith and commerce. You raise an eyebrow, imagining pilgrims clustering around a jar like tourists at a wax museum replica. Beside it, a jar labelled "gastric contents" evokes unintended humour. You peer inside and see a churning swirl of semi-digested grains and fruit skins, preserved as an early attempt to understand digestion. Some experimental embalmers believed analysing stomach fluid could diagnose cause of death, a proto-forensic curiosity that makes you appreciate modern autopsies. You can't help but chuckle at the thought of a medieval pathologist scribbling notes on half-chewed bread. You pass rows of smaller flasks holding eyes, each iris ringed and vivid in its fixative. It's said that embalmers believed the gaze could guide the dead to the next realm, so they preserved eyes separately to restore sight beyond the grave. Historians still argue whether this belief stemmed from mystical tradition, or arose from an anatomical desire to study ocular structure. You touch a jar gently and watch the eyes seem to follow you, turning with uncanny synchronicity. A faint scent of ammonia drifts from a cluster of vials holding blood clots and serum. You cover your nose lest the smell pull you too sharply into wakefulness. Beneath the jars, a low wooden bench bears smudged notations in chalk. "Check heart viscosity," scrawled by a 19th century apprentice. The quirk of chalk marks is like graffiti from another era, scribbled in hurried, uneven strokes that contrast with the meticulous jar labels. You hover before a large jar labelled "infant kidney pear," whose contents shimmer like twin moons in murky liquid. The water around them refracts light into shifting halos. You imagine the hands that delicately lifted each kidney, placed them side by side, and filled the jar with preserving fluid. Academics still debate whether embryonic organs held special spiritual significance in burial rites, or were preserved purely for anatomical study. You lean close enough to see tiny veins branching like rivers across the organ surface. Your pulse steadies as you move toward the corridor's end, where a final cabinet holds an assortment of jars with unidentifiable shapes. Some hold clumps of tissue that look like fibrous seaweed, others hold dark strings reminiscent of tendons. You realize some specimens were salvaged from mass graves, catalogued with alphanumeric codes instead of names. The anonymity feels stark, but also strangely democratic. All around you, the jars gleam silently, each a capsule of loss, memory, and scientific wonder. You inhale the blended aroma of chemicals and old glass, letting it fill your lungs and still your mind. The rhythmic pattern of jars passing in a slow procession feels like a lullaby sung by the dead themselves. Before you step back into the main chamber, you pause to whisper a silent homage to the embalmers who catalogued every organ with reverence and precision. They curated death as if curating an art collection, each specimen a masterpiece of mortality. You carry that hush with you as you turn toward the dim archway leading onward. You step into a low-ceilinged chamber where a single iron chandelier drips molten wax onto flagstones, its amber glow casting every surface in mellow gold. Shelves line the walls, each weighted with amphorae of dried spices, cinnamon, cardamom, black peppercorns. So many aromas mingling you might feel trapped inside a perfumer's dream. Your senses stretch, pulling in scents that feel at once comforting and unsettling, like a memory you cannot place. In medieval India, embalmers experimented with compound masala blends to preserve bodies bound for royal cremation rites, a mainstream fact documented in Sanskrit medical texts from the 12th century. They believed these exotic spices could slow decay and imbue the flesh with divine fragrance. You reach out and crack open a porcelain jar of cassia bark, its curls releasing a sweet warmth under your fingertips. The scent floods your mind with distant bazaars and sunlit courtyards, only to remind you you're standing amid the hush of mortality. You pause to cup a handful of whole cloves. Each bud feels like a miniature mace knotting under your palm. Fringe lore suggests some embalmers mixed cloves with crushed beetles to achieve a vivid crimson hue on cheeks of the deceased for funerary displays. Whether that's grim embellishment or fact remains muddy, yet you cannot unnotice the deep red stains mottling the rim of an ancient mixing bowl nearby. Historians still argue whether the inclusion of ground beetle was sacrificial symbolism or mere aesthetic flourish. Your foot nudges a pile of saffron threads tangled in straw. Their delicate strands glow like threads of sunlight preserved through months of drying. Embalmers prized saffron, not only for its antiseptic qualities, but also for its prohibitive cost. A mainstream detail that underscores how only the wealthy could access true preservation artistry. You inhale, tasting the subtle sweetness that lingers on the back of your tongue, an ironic farewell gift from the dead. Beyond the saffron sits a burlap sack half full of black peppercorns, their surfaces pitted and rough. You crush a few between your gloved fingers and feel sparks of acrid heat as the aroma bursts into life. Some scholars still debate whether pepper was used primarily for its antimicrobial properties, or if it served as a psychological buffer, distracting mourners from the stench of corpses. You imagine apprentices arguing by hearthlight, as bickering now routine as interns squabbling over coffee preferences. Toward the far wall you find a mortar the size of a small basin. Its granite surface bears grooves from centuries of grinding. You dump small pinches of cinnamon, nutmeg, and dried ginger inside before pressing down with the pestle. The grains crush into a coarse paste under your deliberate pressure, each rotation releasing curls of rising steam. The chamber fills with an explosive warmth that feels like stepping into a wood-fired oven, comforting, spicy, and oddly lulling. You consider the argument that these spice pastes functioned more as odour masks than true preservatives. Some fringe accounts claim embalmers secretly scooped fresh horse manure into their mixtures to hasten drying, then covered it all with aromatic dust, so no one noticed. Whether such stories are cautionary fables or buried truths, historians still argue whether any mortuary guild officially sanctioned such grotesque shortcuts. You breathe in the paste's heady aroma, suppressing the urge to gag at the thought of manure mingled beneath the sweetness. On a narrow shelf above you, spot a small glass vial of nutmeg oil, its surface tinted dark amber. A quirky detail from a 17th century English handbook insists embalmers dabbed nutmeg oil behind the ears of mourners to ward off faintness during prolonged vigils. You tip the vial, and a single drop falls onto your glove. Warm, cloying, almost seductive. You inhale its fragrance, then wipe the spot on the marble ledge. Somewhere, centuries of widows and grave diggers have done just the same. The mortar now holds a paste of cinnamon, ginger, and a faint speck of dried rose petals. You smear it onto a length of coarse linen strip, imagining wrapping a body's limbs in this fragrant embrace. The linen will absorb both liquid and odour, sealing the flesh from both decay and the bereaved's noses. Embalmers once called this step the softening, a mainstream term indicating the last stage before wax sealing and decorative finishing. You lean forward to study ancient notes, scribbled on parchment nailed to a wooden post. One entry reads, "Sufficient cinnamon to quell wind, but not so much that the spirit chokes." Another notes, "Choose pepper from Malabar for active preservation." These instructions blend pragmatic measurements with mystic caution. Historians still debate whether such guidelines reflect empiricism or ritual superstition. You trace the fading ink lines, your finger hesitating on the word wind, as if anticipating a ghostly hiccup. To your right, a low brazier holds smouldering charcoal. You crumple a pinch of star anise and tuck it into the embers. A gentle hiss greets you, followed by cooling tendrils of licorice-sweet smoke that snake around the room like benevolent spirits. Feet beneath you tingle in the oily warmth. Fringe scholars claim embalmers believed star anise smoke could repel insects more effectively than dusting bodies with brimstone. Whether that's true remains a debate as rich as the spice itself. Above the brazier hangs a tapestry embroidered with stylized pepper vines and fragrant blossoms. The threads are slightly singed at the edges, a testament to centuries of smoke-laden air. At its base, someone pinned a scrap of parchment reading, "Trust in aroma, for stench betrays. The blunt slogan feels like medieval marketing at its finest. You imagine a mortuary guild meeting in somber robes, passing around spice blends like vintners sampling new vintages. You step back to view the entire setup. Spices crushed in granite, vials lined like soldiers, charcoal brazier smouldering, tapestry swaying softly in the heat. The chamber feels alive with debate, a crucible where science, tradition, and aesthetics collided under flickering candlelight. You let your breathing slow as you absorb the scene, each inhalation a meditation on the layered contradictions of embalming. Before departing, you scoop the remaining paste from the mortar back into its jar, scraping the edges clean. The air still hums with spiced steam, and your skin feels both warm and tinged with traces of cinnamon oil. You pause at the chamber's threshold, looking back at the sacks, jars, and mortar, tools of preservation and disguise alike. Historians still argue whether these aromatic techniques extended the lifespans of preserved bodies or served simply as sensory camouflage for decay's inevitability. You might lean toward one side or the other, yet feel the humility of knowing that some secrets remain locked beneath layers of spice and time. With a final deep breath, you let the spiced haze fill your lungs and soften your mind. The candle drips its last bead of wax, and you step into the corridor beyond, leaving the heated debate to linger among the mortar's grooves. You step onto the sun-baked bedrock of the Acropolis, where dust swirls around your sandals like tiny dancers caught in a fleeting ritual. The wind carries scents of thyme and limestone, mingling with the faint tang of sweat from labouring shoulders. All around you, Athenian workers and metics heave massive foundation stones into place, their weary grunts echoing against the cliff face. In 447 BCE, Pericles commissioned this grand temple to honour Athena, and the ground here was cleared with such precision that even modern engineers marvel at the near-perfect levelling, a mainstream fact that still inspires students of ancient surveying. You feel the smooth flatness of the bedrock underfoot, marvelling at how masons used water-filled trenches as primitive spirit levels to guide each stone's placement. Your fingers graze the edge of a freshly laid limestone block carved from local quarries. The stone is cool to the touch, yet the midday sun warms it in seconds, sending faint wisps of heat rising. A quirky detail from a mason's fragmentary payroll tablet mentions a bonus for anyone who avoided cracking stones. Apparently, splitting a slab could earn you a face full of flying shards, a hazard that kept onlookers both entertained and terrified. You watch as a pair of workmen coax a monolithic block into alignment, using wooden sledges greased with olive oil to reduce friction against the rock. Historians still argue whether they employed simple rollers beneath the sledges or poured water into carved channels to float the stones like miniature barges. Either way, the result is nothing short of miraculous. Above you, the Parthenon stylobate takes shape, 5 courses of carefully cut marble rising in gentle curvature to counter optical illusions that would make straight lines appear concave. You step back to see how each layer leans subtly inward, a technique so advanced that even seasoned architects still debate if it was intentional or a fortunate accident. Nearby, a barefoot apprentice mimics his master's motions, tapping a wooden mallet against a mason's chisel strapped to his hip. You recognize the rhythm. Tap, slide, tap. Each strike releasing tiny curls of limestone dust that drift like pale clouds around his ankles. The dust scents the air with a mineral sweetness, a reminder that beauty often emerges from grainy toil. You focus on a corner where the foundation stones meet at a perfect right angle. Workers use a simple plumb line, just a weight dangling from a cord, to verify vertical alignment. The weight swings lazily, tracing arcs that seem to move in slow motion under the bright Athenian sky. You almost laugh at the contrast, an empire's might hinging on a piece of string and a pebble. Stepping closer, you feel the roughness of ancient tool marks etched into the stone's surface, evidence of countless blows delivered by chisels tipped with bronze, themselves forged by craftsmen whose names are now lost. A fringe anecdote suggests some chisels were cooled in wine to harden the bronze, though whether this was practical or simply a tipsy experiment remains a matter of debate. Your gaze drifts upward to the crisscross of wooden scaffolding that snakes around the emerging temple. Carpenters replenish beams daily, chiseling tenons and mortises that fit together like puzzle pieces. You can almost hear the creak of wood settling under weight, each groan a soft reminder of the precariousness of human ambition. You notice a woman in a simple tunic, climbing a ladder to pass a measuring rod to a mason above. Women rarely worked on such projects. Most were bound to domestic spheres. But a stray inscription hints that some female artisans contributed decorative tiles to the temple's roof. Historians still argue whether their involvement was widespread or limited to a handful of skilled courtesans seeking extra pay. A sudden clatter startles you, as a small stone chip falls from the scaffolding above, landing at your feet with a muted thud. You glance up to see a youth with wide eyes, eyebrows dusted white, shrugging sheepishly before stomping the chip flat with his sandal. You nearly chuckle at the absurdity, the divine temple rising around you courtesy of half-asleep dreamers. The stone beneath your palm bears carved guidelines, shallow incisions marking where next to cut. You trace your fingertip along one, noting the precision of the artisan's hand, steady enough to carve letters legible from tens of paces away. The lines spell out measurements in the old Phoenician script that Athenian builders still used for legacy calculations. A mainstream fact, but each groove feels like a whisper from another era. You inhale deeply, tasting dust and olive oil, and the far-off salt of the Aegean Sea. The temple's foundation is both literal and symbolic, a promise that human hands can shape permanence from raw earth. Yet the scent of perspiration and wood smoke reminds you of mortality. Even the sturdiest stone will crumble one day. A breeze lifts a corner of your tunic, and you notice faint carvings on a hidden stone, a crudely etched owl, the symbol of Athens, tucked into an unnoticed crevice. Fringe lore claims a mason carved it under moonlight to bless the building with wisdom, a superstitious flourish that likely cost him another ration of barley. You turn to watch as an overseer marks completed sections on a scroll, his fingers stained with ink and dust. He ticks off each foundational course: south side, east wing, northwest corner. Scholars still debate whether his tallying represented a contractual obligation or a ritual to appease Poseidon, either expense records or omens, depending on whom you ask. Stepping away, you run your hand across a long trench filled with water, used to test levelness. Ripples catch the sunlight, scattering it against nearby stones in dancing patterns. You crouch to watch shimmering reflections, the movement oddly hypnotic, drawing your mind toward calm forgetfulness. As the workers press on, raising stone after stone, you sense the weight of history converging beneath your feet. Each block laid here has endured more storms, more earthquakes, and more footfalls than any living man could witness. Yet right now, it feels fresh, alive with the sweat and laughter and asperity of 1,000 hands. You stand at the edge of what will become the Parthenon's grand platform, the horizon stretching toward the city of marble spires and bustling agoras below. The foundation is complete, but the temple is still a whisper of promise. The real wonder lies in the next steps: summoning raw marble from quarries, sculpting friezes that will immortalize gods, and hoisting Doric columns skyward. But in this moment, amid sweat and stone and the ghostly hum of chisels, you feel intimately connected to every mason who ever bent to carve meaning from rock. You breathe in once more, letting the dusty wind fill your lungs, and feel both the grandeur of human ambition and the gentle lull of endurance. You emerge from the quarried plateau where carts strain under their marble burdens, the air alive with the clatter of stone on stone and the hiss of dust. The ridge ahead slopes steeply toward the agora, and at its crest you see dozens of oxen-drawn wagons heaped with gleaming pentelic marble, each block catching sunlight like a frozen wave. Workers in simple chitons guide the oxen down narrow paths carved into the cliffside. Your boots crunch on fragmented chips of marble that glitter like broken gems under your feet. You pause at the edge of the trail, letting the breeze carry the faint salt of the sea mixed with the chalky sweetness of stone. In 438 BCE, architects surveyed these very slopes to chart the safest routes, a mainstream fact that underscores their meticulous planning amid treacherous terrain. A driver cracks a whip made of braided goat leather, and the oxen bellow, their breath misting in the cool morning air. You step forward, inhaling the musky warmth of animal hide mingled with the stone dust. A quirky detail from an obscure quarry tablet mentions drivers feeding the oxen figs dipped in honey to coax them uphill. A bargaining chip as precious as any coin, since a well-fed ox meant fewer delays. You join a small group of labourers lifting the first block onto a wooden sledge greased with animal fat. Your palms press against the marble's smooth surface, marvelling at how the stone was split along natural veins, creating slabs nearly flawless in thickness. Historians still argue whether quarrymen used iron wedges alone or combined thermal shock, heating the stone then dousing it with cold water to crack massive blocks free. But either way, the result speaks to a sophisticated mastery of geology. Ahead, several masons wield pointed picks to pry away marble faceplates. Each pick bites into the rock with a metallic snap, sending plumes of white dust swirling around their shoulders. You rub your forearm across your brow to clear the haze, releasing a soft cloud of chalk that settles back onto the stone's surface. The moment feels suspended between creation and decay, artistry and abrasion. You follow the laden sledge as it inches downward, drawn by oxen picking their steps carefully on the rocky incline. The path twists and narrows, flanked by sheer drops that reveal the city's white marble rooftops in the distance. Below you, the agora thrums with morning commerce. Stallholders shouting, children weaving between legs, fishmongers brandishing silver-scaled catches. The contrast between the lively market and the silent heaviness of these stones feels like two worlds colliding. You crouch beside the trail to inspect the underside of a recent block. Tool marks gouged into the marble create a subtle texture, a fingerprint left by quarrymen whose names are lost to time. A fringe anecdote claims some labourers carved tiny reliefs of their hometown gods into hidden corners to seek protection during the descent. A devotional practice historians still debate as either heartfelt piety or simple superstition. You trace a shallow carving of a goat-headed deity, imagining the relief it provided on grueling days. The sledge reaches a widening curve where wooden rollers await. Men strewn along the track reposition the logs beneath the sled, pushing and guiding with coordinated grunts. You lend a hand, placing a fresh roller under the sledge's runners. The marble block shifts with a groan, then moves forward as the rollers spin beneath it. You feel the ancient rhythm of labour, simple mechanics amplified by collective force. As you stand, you brush a stray curl of hair from your face, noticing how sunlight refracts through airborne dust into golden shafts. The sight reminds you of waves crashing on a shore painted in morning light. You close your eyes and inhale the mingled scents of animal fat, limestone dust, and wild oregano growing along the cliffs, an aromatic snapshot of sun and stone. A sudden shout from below sends you scrambling back to the path's edge. A wagon wheel has splintered, sending fragments flying. You hurry down to help, finding two drivers wrestling a stubborn ox free from tangled harness straps. The animal's eyes widen in panic, its hoof snagged on a wooden splinter. You kneel to loosen the leather yoke, your fingers slick with sweat and dust. Once freed, the oxer twitches and lumbers away, tail flicking as if in contempt of human folly. You brush the grime from your hands and stand at the head of the trail where a small shrine has been erected. Inside rests a stone relief of Athena's owl, its eyes painted with black pitch that has faded into soft grey. Offerings of oil lamps and scraps of barley lie beneath, a quiet plea for divine favour on this perilous descent. Historians still argue whether labourers cleared the shrine each evening or if gifts were left to accumulate until a priest ceremonially removed them. Either way, the air here feels heavy with devotion and whispered prayers. Beyond the shrine, the track levels out into a broad terrace where the marble blocks await further finishing. You wander among them, tracing the clean-cut edges, and marvelled at the uniformity of slabs large enough to serve as roof beams. This secondary workspace bustles with sculptors smoothing surfaces with bronze hand tools, their rhythmic motions producing a steady, soothing percussion. You slip behind a mass bleachers out of the sun and crouch beside a partially finished drum of a Doric column. The fluted grooves stand out stark and crisp, each curve carved to catch and play with shifting light. A master craftsman hovers overhead, tapping along the groove with a small mallet to test for uniform depth. A tactic so precise that any variation greater than a fraction of a finger's width would be immediately obvious from afar. Your pulse slows as you absorb the mastery on display, The marble's cool whiteness feels alive under your gaze, as though each block holds secret resonance waiting to be released by a deft touch. You inhale one last time, letting the blended air of dust, fat, and stone fill your lungs. When at last the wagons are reloaded, the teams of oxen harnessed anew, you position yourself at the front of the procession. As it moves off, the creak of leather straps, the rhythm of hooves over stone, the steady slide of marble on sledges, you feel the weight of centuries riding toward the Acropolis. Each block carries not just its mass, but the hopes, labours, and whispered prayers of countless workers. You watch the line of wagons recede up the slope, the glittering marble gliding upward like pale clouds ascending into a brightening sky. In this moment, you realize the construction of the Parthenon is as much about human will as it is about stone, a testament carved in toil and sweat, carried on the backs of beasts and the shoulders of artisans. You step into a sunlit courtyard framed by wooden scaffolds and stone blocks half-carved, where a low hum of focused chatter mingles with the sharp ring of hammer against chisel. Here, the master sculptor Phidias holds court, his hand guiding apprentices as they coax life from marble. The air is cool with crushed stone dust, and warmed by midday sun, layering a scent that's both dry and subtly sweet. In 447 BCE, Phidias began his tenure, overseeing the Parthenon's sculptural program, a mainstream fact, documented by later chroniclers, ensuring every flank and pediment would embody divine perfection. You watch his broad hands steady, a young apprentice's grip, fingers brushing white marble powder from a shallow groove. The apprentice's chisel bites into the stone with a sharp snap, releasing a spray of fine grit that drifts through the air like pale motes. You crouch beside a half-finished metope depicting a centaur struggle, the marble figures rising in relief as if frozen mid-tussle. A quirky tale passed down in later workshops claims that Phidias once challenged an apprentice to carve ears so lifelike they'd hear the wind. Some assert he dismissed any work lacking that precise whisper of motion. Historians still argue whether this anecdote reflects playful guild lore or a genuine test of skill. Your gloved fingertip brushes along the curve of a fluted column drum, feeling each shallow channel etched with rhythmic precision. The grooves catch sunlight, casting striped shadows on the ground like prison bars, perhaps a subconscious nod to mortal confinement compared to the god's freedom. You inhale deeply, tasting a trace of beeswax used by sculptors to highlight details before final polishing. Across the courtyard, an apprentice leans into a block of Parian marble, tracing a faint pencil outline of Athena's drapery folds. You recall that marble from the nearby island was prized for its pure white quality, a mainstream fact that Athens imported at great expense. You inhale the marble's faint mineral tang and taste a hint of sea salt on your lips, a reminder of Pentelic's mild impurity versus Parian's aristocratic clarity. A fringe rumour insists Phidias once slipped a bronze coin beneath his chisel's handle to achieve the perfect resonant tone when carving, an eccentric flourish that no contemporary source confirms. Yet you can't help smiling at the thought of such a meticulous virtuoso fussing over sonic feedback. You rise to your feet and move toward a long bench where masters demonstrate advanced techniques. You pause as a sculptor uses a bow drill, a simple wooden frame twisted by rope, to bore tiny holes along a figure's hairline. Each rotation bites quietly into the marble, creating a series of delicate perforations that he'll later smooth into individual curls. The tool makes a soft, pulsing hum against the stone, like a distant insect in the warm air. You trace the sequence in your mind. Bow drill for deep undercuts, then finer chisels for detail, followed by abrasives to soften the surface. It's a choreography maintained for centuries, a tactile dialect older than any spoken word. Historians still debate whether the Parthenon's delicate features owe more to Phidias's innovation or to evolving Attic traditions stretching back generations. Near the centre of the courtyard stands a life-size statue of Athena Promachos, still rough-hewn and supported by wooden braces. You circle it, noting how each limb is blocked out before the finishing passes. Sparks of dust float across its shoulder like embers, and you catch the faint echo of hammer strikes bouncing off surrounding scaffolding. You run your hand along a teaching mark where Phidias sketched adjustments in charcoal, tiny notches indicating where a forearm should retreat or extend. A sweet tingling of laurel oil drips from a nearby brazier burning leaves, once draped on Athena's statue, a fringe practice said to bless the marble with resilience against moisture. Whether the oil actually preserved the stone or simply perfumed the workshop remains a debated question among conservationists. You inhale the herbal aroma, noting how it softens the sharper edges of stone dust in the air. You wander to a shaded corner where master carvers file intricate patterns on a cornice block meant for the temple's west pediment. The filing metal rasp scrapes in a steady rhythm, sounding almost like waves lapping on distant shores. You press your ear close and feel the vibration travel through the stone into your bones, a reminder that even the hardest marble carries hidden life when shaped by human hands. At the edge of your vision, you glimpse a small wooden crate holding plaster casts of earlier models. Phidias used these to ensure consistency across sculptures, a mainstream method that prefigured later Roman copy techniques. You lift a cast fragment, lightweight and cold, and feel its smooth curves etched from softer material, a tactile blueprint for perfection. Above you, a mason hoists a nearly complete pediment panel on a winch, its dozens of figures locked in mythic motion. You watch as ropes strain and timber creaks under the panel's weight. The scene portrays gods and giants in a celestial battle, each face rendered with an expression so vivid you nearly catch whispered cries in the stone. Scholars still argue whether this dramatic composition reflects Phidias's personal vision or a collective workshop design. You inhale the tang of metal from the winch hardware and taste a faint tang of sweat on your tongue. A sudden breeze lifts a smudge of marble dust across the courtyard, depositing it on your eyelash. You blink, letting it settle, and appreciate how the dust settles. That no matter how precise the chisel, a trace remains, marking every hand that ever shaped the block. You step back toward Phidias's platform, where he oversees the final approval of a fluted column capital carved with acanthus leaves. The capital's leaves curl with a lifelike grace, each vein carved so deeply that shadows pool in their folds. You crouch to examine the undercut edges, marveling at the sculptor's ability to turn rigid stone into organic fluidity. Your heart slows as you absorb the mastery on display. The courtyard's noise, chisels, drills, raspers, fades into a distant murmur. You breathe in one last time, letting the mixed scents of marble dust, laurel oil, and beeswax fill your lungs and calm your thoughts. Here, under Phidias's discerning eye, imperfection yields to precision, and raw stone transforms into reverence. You sense the weight of history in every strike, the silent applause of centuries as each sculpted figure emerges. In this space of creation and discipline, you find a quiet stillness, a place where the union of art and labour offers a gentle passage into wonder. You step onto a broad earthen ramp that snakes around the Parthenon's perimeter, its packed soil warm underfoot from weeks of sun. The ramp, meticulously angled, allows workers to haul column drums skyward with minimal incline. A mainstream fact recorded by ancient engineers who understood that a gentle grade reduced strain on ropes and oxen alike. You feel the soft granules shift as you shift your weight, each footfall stirring a small cloud of dust. Before you stands a row of unassembled column drums, their pale pentelic marble glowing in the afternoon sun. Each drum bears shallow alignment notches, vertical grooves carved into the surfaces, so that, once hoisted, artisan teams could rotate and stack them with millimeter precision. You trace one notch with a gloved fingertip, marveling at the foresight required to align drums forming a perfect cylinder. Workers tighten thick hemp ropes around a single drum, looping them through iron rings set into the stone, hardware installed at the quarry to facilitate later lifting. A quirky detail from a recently discovered vase painting shows embalmers using similar iron-rimmed stones, suggesting tradespeople shared techniques. You inhale the coarse scent of hemp and scented sea salt from the nearby cliffs, where rope makers harvested brine-soaked fibers. Carpenters and masons stand ready with wooden capstans, vertical posts encircled by crossbars used to wind ropes and generate mechanical advantage. You watch as a team of 6 men shove the crossbars in unison, each turn ratcheting the drum upward by inches. The drum groans against wood blocks placed as temporary supports, a sound that throbs through your chest like a slow heartbeat. You pause to note the ramp's slight curvature, designed to avoid sharp turns that could snag the sledges carrying drums. Historians still argue whether the ramp was built exclusively for column assembly or repurposed from earlier defensive walls. Either theory underscores the ingenuity of Athenian builders. You inhale again, tasting dust and donkey sweat, and feel the lingering echo of hammers from workshops below. Above you, two masons stand atop the growing column, directing the drum into place with long wooden poles tipped with metal hooks. Their silhouettes shift against the sky as ropes strain under the drum's weight. You steady your breathing and lean forward, letting the rhythmic clank of hoisting iron fade into a soft background murmur. When the drum reaches the capital, a master mason uses mallets and wooden shims to seat it perfectly against the drum below. You watch the tiny wedges slide into place, absorbing the slightest gap until the drum settles with a precise click. This method predates modern cranes, yet achieves alignment, rivaling contemporary construction. It's both a triumph of brute force and a testament to refined technique. At your shoulder, you feel a soft brush of cool air. Peering down, you spot a carved relief of an owl, the mason's signature, hidden beneath the column's lip. Fringe lore suggests each crew left a small emblem to mark their contribution, though records still debate whether this was widespread practice or limited to a few guilds. You smile at the thought of secret signatures echoing through millennia. You step back to observe the column from a slight distance. Each drum's fluted grooves now flow seamlessly into the next, forming unbroken vertical lines that seem to lift the entire structure heavenward. The optical curvature of the stylobate echoes here too. Each column leans ever so slightly inward, a subtle correction that maintains the Parthenon's visual perfection against the bright attic sky. Workers move on to the next drum, and you follow their progress. Cradle, hoist, shim, settle. You inhale the mingled scents of hemp, marble dust, and a faint hint of pitch used to waterproof the ramp. Occasionally a stray droplet of tar arcs from a nearby container, splattering onto white stone and leaving a stark black dot, a reminder that even the purest marble is vulnerable to chance. You notice a pair of apprentices measuring the column's circumference with a flexible reed rod, bending it around to confirm uniformity. Historians still argue whether they used human hair threads or reed for these measurements. Both materials are mentioned in classical texts, but no conclusive evidence settles the debate. You lean in to feel the tension of the reed in your own hand, appreciating its simplicity. As the sun sinks lower, shadows stretch across the scaffolding, and the drum in progress glows with a rosy hue. You hear the distant call of sailors from Piraeus, their voices carried on the breeze mingled with the clamour of stone and wood. The scene feels alive, a symphony of elements: earth, water, air, and fire, all converging to lift a temple skyward. You step onto a narrow wooden platform affixed to the column's side, where two masons apply finishing touches to the flute's edges, using small bronze chisels to crisp each groove. The chisels sing against the marble, producing a soft, ringing tone that you note but do not mind. Each tap echoes like a tiny bell, summoning the goddess's favour with every precise incision. A gust of wind whistles between the drums, carrying with it the scent of time and the murmur of the city below. You pause to breathe deeply, feeling your pulse align with the temple's slow ascent. The rising column seems to pull your gaze upward, guiding your thoughts toward loftier realms. Finally, the crew prepares for the next drum. You step off the platform and onto the ramp once more, dust swirling as you descend. The completed column stands behind you, a pillar of perfection born from sweat, ingenuity, and unwavering collaboration. Before moving on, you press your palm against the column's fluted shaft, feeling the cool yet gradually warming marble under your fingers. You feel the slight give of wood and metal within, the echoes of those who lifted and aligned each drum. It's a tactile testament to collective will, etched into stone for eternity. Stepping back down to the agora path, you carry the column's upward momentum in your chest. The effort to erect each drum was arduous, but each success propelled the Parthenon closer to its divine purpose, a luminous temple rising from the rock of human determination. You walk along the broad base of the nearly complete Parthenon, your footsteps tracing the pathway once lined with scaffolding poles and ropes. Above you soars the entablature, its continuous ionic frieze stretching nearly 160 meters in a single carved narrative, a mainstream fact proving the Athenians' mastery of stone and story. The soft afternoon light catches the raised reliefs, casting shadows that seem to animate the figures in motion. Your gaze follows the Parthenic procession unfolding in marble. Chariots gliding forward, horses rearing as riders hold reins tight, priests bearing amphorae aloft. You inhale the mingled scents of limestone dust and beeswax polish still lingering from final treatments. The musty tang of antiquity weaves with a faint, sweet note of pine resin used to seal the carving scars. An unexpected nuance that reminds you even stone can bear the echo of its finishing oils. You step closer, your gloved fingertip brushing against the weathered surface where a priestess's peplos folds then flares in silken stone. The carved fabric curves so convincingly that you almost feel its weight draped over your own shoulders. A fringe tradition whispered among eternally amazed travelers insists that Phidias sculpted one unseen figure as a self-portrait, hiding his own likeness in a horse's eye for posterity. Whether that's myth or mischief, historians still argue whether any such cameo exists, or if it's simply a playful rumor passed down by apprentices eager for a secret. As you move along, you spot a small irregularity. The face of an aged woman quietly inserted among the idealized youths, her features carved with deeper lines and a crooked grin. Some scholars debate whether this was an intentional nod to real Athenians invited to join the procession, or a case of stone running low and sculptors forced to reuse an apprentice's practice block. You smile at the thought of grave-faced masons shrugging and carving a neighbor into the temple to save time and marble. A gentle breeze stirs, rattling loose chips of marble that drift like pale snowflakes across the relief. You close your eyes and breathe deeply, letting the breeze carry away any tension in your shoulders. Behind you, a chorus of distant hammers and chisels continues their soft percussion. But here the frieze's surface feels so smooth beneath your fingertips that it almost quiets every other sound. You crouch to examine a cluster of sacrificial calves being led toward an altar. Their ears perked and noses wrinkled, they look almost alive in the frozen marble. A quirky anecdote from a displaced mason's diary claims he once snuck a tiny carved rat into the crowd. So small no one noticed until centuries later. Perhaps to warn future observers that every crowd, however sacred, has room for absurdity. You peer carefully but see only calves and priests, as if the mischievous rodent remained hidden behind every hoof. Your attention shifts to a pair of horse hooves barely lifting from the ground, carved so delicately that you can see imprints of vein and sinew in the underside. The realism is so intense that one visitor, according to a fringe travelogue, attempted to lead the horse by its carved bridle, convinced it stood ready to follow. Historians still argue whether such reactions were common among eyewitnesses or the stuff of sensationalized gossip. You stand and trace the procession toward its culmination. Majestic figures of gods stepping forth to greet their mortal subjects. Athena Parthenos herself appears, holding Nike aloft in frozen triumph. You inhale sharply as the relief's surface seems to shimmer in the shifting light. The scent of warmed marble dust and aged resin flirts with the back of your throat, a subtle reminder that even after millennia, the Parthenon still carries the residue of its creation. You lean in to study a carved wreath of olive leaves being offered by a youth. Each leaf shows tiny, imperfect serrations along its edge, as if lifted directly from a real branch. A mainstream fact notes that local olive groves provided wreaths for the Parthenon Games, their sacred oil lighting city lamps each year. You imagine the scent of crushed olives lingering on the stone, folded into every carved vein of those wreaths. A scholar's voice echoes in your mind, questioning whether these friezes were carved entirely in workshop studios on the slope of the Acropolis or finished in situ. The debate hinges on tool mark analyses. Some say the shallow grooves on the back of the marble indicate relief was partially carved before stones were lifted. Historians still argue whether final detailing happened at height or down below, but you feel the answer lies in the faint rasp of chisels you still hear overhead. You press a hand against the frieze where the sky meets the stone horizon, feeling a faint tremor from distant thunderheads forming over the mainland. The carved clouds above the figures seem to grow more alive, their rounded forms capturing the weight of approaching weather. A fringe tale, and perhaps the most poetic of them all, holds that worshippers once believed the carving itself could call rain, if sculpted just so. Whether this belief ever influenced the friez's design remains lost to time. The air shifts, carrying a faint trace of sunlight-warmed pine from the hill's perimeter. You inhale and allow the combined sensations, the rustle of linen folds, the echo of hoofbeats, the staying cold of marble under your palm, to wash over you. Each carved scene feels like a whisper echoing across centuries, inviting you to step into a moment when gods and mortals mingled in stone. You move to where the frieze meets a pilaster, noting how the narrative wraps seamlessly around corners, never interrupted. The seamless flow required sculptors to plan every scene in advance, mapping the story on papyrus scrolls before the first chisel struck marble. A mainstream fact. Preparatory sketches survive in fragmentary form at the British Museum, hinting at the friez's original painted colours. You imagine those vibrant reds and blues gleaming where now only bare stone prevails. A drip of water splashes onto the frieze, sending a tiny rill down a calf's shoulder. You watch as the liquid stains the marble temporarily, pooling at the base before soaking in. The sensation is jarring. This living response from stone that has borne silent witness for 500 years. The cold splash makes you shiver, though the sun still warms your back, a reminder that this temple stands at the confluence of permanence and change. You step back, heart slowing as you take in the entire procession one last time. The figures seem to breathe in the breeze, a silent pageant carved in stone and shadow. You let your gaze drift upward to the cornice, noting the decorative Anthemian pattern crowning the narrative. An ornamental flourish, so graceful it feels like the temple's sigh. As you turn away, you place your palm on the frieze one final time, feeling the slight undulations of chisel work and the cool, reassuring solidity of marble. You carry with you the echoes of hoofbeats, whispered prayers, and silent laughter carved into stone. In this slow communion with the Parthenon's narrative frieze, you understand why its story still captivates. It is a testament to human ambition, craftsmanship, and the ever-present dance between myth and memory. You step beneath a moss-clad torii gate, its vermilion paint long since peeled away by rain and time. A chill breathes through the narrow lane before you, stirring fallen cherry blossoms that carpet the cracked earth like forgotten prayers. Lantern posts lean at odd angles, their paper shades torn to tatters, casting ghost-bone shadows that flicker when the wind sighs. In the early Edo period, ronin often retreated to the outskirts of Edo, where abandoned temples and shrines stood empty. Mainstream fact gleaned from shogunate patrol records, noting 3 distinct hideout districts by 1705. You inhale the damp air, fragrant with decaying cedar beams and the distant tang of river water seeping through fractured stone. Each breath seems to suspend time, as though the old suburb itself hesitates between past outrage and present silence. Ahead, you pass the crumbling remains of a samurai manor, its sliding shoji doors collapsed inward, exposing the interior's wooden skeleton. Floorboards sag beneath your weight, creaking like a tired sigh. Historians still argue whether these hideouts served only as temporary refuges or evolved into permanent communities of masterless samurai, but standing here, among the ruins, you sense both transience and tenacity carved into every beam. Your footfalls crunch over scattered tiles, glazed in faded cobalt and white, remnants of a koi pond veranda once draped in silk mats. A quirky detail tucked into an old ledger mentions that one ex-samurai, desperate for privacy, nailed his own sandals to the porch to discourage thieves, an absurdly literal warning for would-be intruders. You picture a pale ghost, bewildered by its own footwear, stumbling in circles until the tide of history carried it away. To your right, a low stone lantern tilts precariously at the entrance to what must have once been the manor's kamidana niche. The carved lotus petals at its base bear lichen the colour of faded jade. Inside the niche, you find a shattered fragment of porcelain, painted with a crane mid-flight. It clinks softly under your palm, a lonely echo of prayers once offered to Inari. You tuck the shard into your sleeve as if gathering a whisper from the ancients. The lane widens as you move deeper into the suburb, flanked by overgrown bamboo thickets. The stalks resemble silent sentinels, their hollow breath rasping as you brush past. You pause to run your gloved fingers along the silky skin of a bamboo culm, noting the slight give under your touch. Fringe accounts claim ronin sharpened kodachi blades against bamboo knots to maintain edge without leaving visible marks, though whether this practice was widespread remains a debate as slender as the culms themselves. A breeze rattles through broken roof tiles overhead, carrying the faint murmur of distant trains, a modern whisper reminding you that the world beyond this ghost town pulses with electric life. You imagine commuters hurtling past, unaware of the shadows that linger here, of blades sharpened in moonlight and oaths murmured to silent gods. Crossing a shallow ditch clogged with fallen leaves, you find the entrance to an overgrown courtyard. Stone pillars, once supporting a grand Sukiya-style veranda, now stand marooned in tangles of ivy. You step among them, each footfall disturbing geckos darting for cover. The ivy's thick vines have crept into cracks, prying boards apart, suggesting that nature is the ronin's fiercest ally and harshest jailer alike. You crouch beside a collapsed wash basin carved of granite, rim chipped into jagged crescents. Water still pools in its hollow, reflecting the grey sky and your own face, pale and contemplative. You dip your fingers into the cold liquid, inhaling its musty aroma, a blend of stagnant rainwater and the faint perfume of fallen cedar needles. The basin's underside bears a chiseled emblem, the kanji for destiny, scratched so deep it almost glows. You wonder whether a samurai etched it with his final breath, or if a wanderer left it to warn others that fate here comes with drawn steel. From the courtyard, you glimpse a row of faded Fusuma panels leaning against a derelict wall. Their painted landscapes, once vibrant with pine and mountain, are now smudged into ghostly silhouettes. You run a fingertip along the edge of one panel, where lacquer still glistens like tear tracks down an ink-washed face. Historians still argue whether itinerant artists or the ronin themselves created those paintings, but you feel the intimacy of brush and blade bound by the same restless hand. As you follow the lane's gentle curve, half-buried stone markers appear, guiding path travelers once relied upon. Their inscriptions are worn to near illegibility, though you catch fragments of characters for loyalty and honor carved into weathered granite. A fringe tale claims that some hideouts were blessed by Buddhist monks who inscribed protective sutras on stone, but no surviving marker bears any trace of Sanskrit, only the local dialect's stoic reminders. The last vestige of daylight filters through ragged rooftops as you step beneath a collapsed gatehouse. Its pillars bow inward, as if in quiet prayer, supporting nothing but memories. You pause to listen for the soft scrape of sandals or a whisper of stealthy movement, but only cicadas trill in the heavy dusk. Before you continues the path to the district's final ruin, a low-slung building that housed the Ronin's council chamber. Beyond its boarded windows, you catch the faint glow of your own lantern reflected in puddles. You inhale deeply, steadying your thoughts for the next discovery hidden just beyond collapsed floorboards. In this ghostly gateway between past and present, you recognize the paradox of abandonment and allegiance. The torii under which you entered stands like an open invitation and a final threshold, once a portal to sacred spaces, now a reminder that some doors, once crossed, can never be unsealed. You crouch beside a sagging tatami-covered floor, the worn straw matting giving under your knees with a soft, muffled sigh. The room smells of musty humidity and old pine, an earthy perfume that clings to your nostrils as you lift a corner of the tatami with careful fingers. Beneath lies a hidden cavity, its edges framed by slim cedar beams darkened with age and dust. In the Edo period, master builders deliberately constructed hinoki floorboards with removable panels to conceal valuables or secret compartments, a mainstream fact recorded in carpentry manuals of the 18th century. You trace your gloved fingertips along the smooth grain of a recessed board, marveling at the precision of the joinery that has endured centuries of weight without warping. As you pry the panel free, a faint creak echoes through the empty chamber, like a whispered confession. Beneath, you find a small cache, a coiled shakujo staff cord, its braided hemp still surprisingly supple, and a leather pouch containing several razor-sharp tanto blades whose steel gleams even in the dim light. These were not ceremonial. Their edges are honed as if used yesterday. You carefully lift a scuffed iron tuba, the ornate handguard of an abandoned katana, bearing an intricate chrysanthemum motif. A quirky tidbit passed down among swordsmiths suggests some ronin slid small talismans into their guards to ward off spiritual pursuit should they fall in battle, embedding prayers of protection within steel itself. You turn the tsuba in your palm, feeling the raised petals under your gloved thumb. Next, you uncover a dust-choked scroll tied with a silken ribbon, its worn paper crackling softly as you undo the knot. The inked characters describe a local ronin code, listing rendezvous points and challenges for unassumed recruits. A fringe rumor claims the code included instructions on forging new identities using stolen temple seals, though no surviving seals bear those exact markings. You unroll the scroll carefully, inhaling the papery scent of ancient ink and rotting glue. Beneath the scroll, you find a stack of folded maps rendered on thin washi paper, edges frayed and corners lost to time. The maps mark hidden paths through overgrown graveyards and abandoned tea houses, routes that allowed ronin to move unseen across district boundaries. Historians still argue whether these maps were drawn by itinerant artists hired by the samurai or by the ronin themselves, using stolen surveying instruments. The faint pencil guidelines beneath the ink suggest a practiced hand, one comfortable with both brush and compass. You pause to run a finger around the cavity's perimeter, brushing away layers of dust and detritus. Your glove picks up a glint of gold, an oblong ornamental manuki once tucked between belt layers. It bears the emblem of a fallen samurai clan, their crests struck from their daimyo's armor after his disgrace. You tuck the manuki into your pocket as a talisman against bad luck. A low creak from above reminds you that the floorboards strain with every breath you take. You replace the panel momentarily to test its fit before sliding it back and lifting one last board. This reveals a shallow box carved into the subfloor, its lid jammed by centuries of debris. With a gentle tap of your palm, the box pops free, disgorging a handful of dried chrysanthemum petals and a lacquered sake cup. The petals are brittle, but carry a faint, sweet scent, as if preserved by ritual. You hold the sake cup up to the dim skylight and peer inside. A thin film of residue lines the bottom, crusted with traces of rice and amber liquid. A mainstream detail, sake was often hidden in such vessels to share among ronin during secret meetings, sealing oaths of loyalty in shared drams. You turn the cup and note a faint inscription in gold leaf. Bloodwater. A chilling phrase you imagine spoken in hushed tones before blades were bared. As you replace the cup, you notice wilted silk ribbons clinging to the cavity's edges, remnants of decorative Shimenawa ropes once used to purify hidden spaces. Fringe anecdotes claim ronin sprinkled salt around these niches to ward off evil spirits, believing that the same rituals used in temples could hide them from both mortal and supernatural hunters. Curiously, you find no trace of salt here, only the ribbons, frayed and almost translucent. Sliding your hand along the cavity's wall, you discover a tiny hatch barely large enough for a rolled scroll. Inside lies a thin bamboo tube sealed with lacquer and tied with red twine. You untie it to reveal a delicate calligraphy brush with squirrel hair bristles. You imagine the brush once drawn across paper in flickering candlelight, composing secret messages that passed between masterless brothers. You pause and press your palm flat against the tatami surface, sensing the faint echo of footsteps above. Perhaps the ghostly shuffle of a forgotten sentinel. The old manor floor feels alive, a breathing grid of hidden stories encoded in every hidden panel. You place each recovered item carefully into a cloth pouch, mindful of preserving the fragile integrity of centuries-old wood and steel. Before sealing the cabin floor once more, you brush away stray dust with a soft cloth, smoothing the tatami so no sign of intrusion remains. The panels slide back into place with minimal effort, as if the manor itself accepts your respectful ministrations. You rise, dusting straw fibers from your robes, and step back to admire the room's unbroken continuity. As you stand, you recall stepping beneath the torii, traversing ghostly gateways, and now uncovering these secrets beneath the floorboards. Each hidden object carries the weight of desperate lives and stealthy maneuvers, reminders that the ronin struggle was waged as much in shadows as on open fields. In this silent room, You feel their presence breathe through the preserved wood, whispered in the grain, and sealed behind every worn panel. You step into a narrow antechamber, where the air smells of old incense and damp plaster. The rough wooden walls bear the faint grain of joists long since exposed, and here and there, faded brushstrokes peek through dirt, remnants of inked warnings and rendezvous marks left by ronin centuries ago. In the Edo period, masterless samurai scrawled secret symbols on shoji backings and plaster seams to guide comrades through the maze of abandoned suburbs. A mainstream fact noted in clandestine shogunate reports that catalogued over 50 sees such hideouts by 1,720. You reach out to trace one pale stroke, a single kanji for ally, its form jagged where many hands have retraced it in darkness. Your fingertip picks up dust and grit, the texture almost like the whisper of silk rubbing against steel. A low beam overhead bears a series of notch marks, small V-shaped cuts numbered in a hasty tally. Fringe accounts claim these counted the nights until the next moonless meeting. Historians still argue whether they were practical logs or ritual tallying meant to ward off misfortune. You run your thumb along the carvings, feeling the rhythm of time marked in wood, each notch a silent echo of fateful gatherings. To your left, a fragment of red seal ink smudges the plaster where someone pressed a handwritten note, now lost to peeling layers. You press a gloved hand over the smear, catching a trace of pigment under your nail. It stings slightly, more from surprise than chemical bite. A quirky detail tucked into a local diary suggests that some ronin mixed their sealing ink with powdered mica for a subtle shimmer, both decorative and deceptive under lamplight. Further along, a small alcove holds the ghost of a sake stain, an uneven ring marking where a cup once rested against the wall. The stain's edges blur into the plaster, like a bruise refusing to fade. You crouch to study it, recognizing the urbane ritual, broth shared in whispered vows. Historians still debate whether these wall stains were incidental or intentional, reminders for initiates to reseal old covenants at each visit. Above the alcove, narrow slits cut into the plaster suggest peering holes, the perfect vantage for scouts to watch corridors unseen. You peer through one and see only darkness, but your breathing makes the far side quiver with faint echoes. A fringe rumour claims some hideouts rigged these slits with bells to warn of intruders. Whether they ever truly worked remains unverified. You stand and circle the chamber, noticing that every few feet a smudge of charcoal marks a directional arrow. Some graffito points left, others right, and a few double-headed strokes warn of danger ahead. The charcoal sticks crumble under your touch, sending tiny shards to the floor. You shake out your sleeve, tasting charcoal on your tongue like cold ash. At the chamber's far end, a tattered curtain of hemp rope hangs across a doorway, its fibres fraying into pale threads. Behind it, you see faint inscriptions carved into the doorframe. Take the third step, then turn east. The instructions read like a poetic riddle, half practical, half metaphysical. You imagine ronin chanting it under breath before stepping into the unknown, their swords silent at their sides. You pull aside the rope and glimpse beyond, a low passageway paved with smooth river stones, slick with moss. Here, someone scrawled a long, looping kanji that translates as perseverance, its form both elegant and unsteady. A scholar's debate, I recall, questions whether this grand inscription was meant to inspire or to mark the domain of a particular ronin clan. You kneel to admire the calligraphy's sweeping curves, each flick of the brush captured in faint relief on the stone. As you follow the passage, the walls grow rougher, plaster giving way to exposed clay mixed with straw. On one patch, small pebbles protrude like embedded stars. A fringe narrative claims ronin-encrusted walls with flint to make secret messages, whispers in stone that only the initiated could read by touch. You close your eyes and let your fingers drift over the gritty surface, half expecting to feel hidden symbols beneath the pebbles. A sudden skitter of insects makes you jump, and you drop to one knee, peering at a scrawl in red ochre near a narrow vent. The kanji there reads poison alongside a crude drawing of crossed arrows. You inhale sharply, remembering that some ronin carried early toxin-tip arrows for desperate defense. Historians still argue whether these warnings were ever heeded, or if they served purely as intimidation for would-be assassins. Ahead, the passage splits. On one wall, a curled line of inked script flows like a poem. In Shadow's cradle we rise. The letters are so fluid they seem to slither along the surface. A quirky scribble below attributes the line to a ronin poet who once claimed that art and assassination were complementary disciplines. You run a fingertip over the phrase, noting how soot has clung to the grooves left by the brush. You pause at the fork, studying two arrows, one pointing down a descending stair and another toward a low doorway smeared with whitewash. You sense the tension in the air, as though the walls themselves expect your choice. You choose the low doorway and duck through, your shoulder brushing plaster that rumbles softly. Inside, you find a small chamber lit by faint skylight. On one wall, an unwitting graffiti artist scratched a playful comment in katakana. "Nice hideout, bro." The casual modern tone makes you grin. Someone visited long after Edo's ronin faded, seeking thrills in haunted ruins. Historians still debate how much modern trespassing has altered authentic markings. You run the back of your hand over the joke, amused by the temporal collision. The chamber's far corner holds the most striking whisper. A small alcove where plaster peeled in concentric circles, revealing layers of paint, first ochre, then white, then a pale blue. It's as though the walls wore coats of identity, stripped away over ages. You imagine each layer covering messages now lost, like memories painted over. A shaft of moonlight through the skylight falls onto a final marking, a delicate kanji for freedom, etched so lightly it's barely visible. You lean forward to catch the glint of moon on carved edges, inhaling the cold air that smells of distant snow, yet no snow falls here. The word resonates, a whisper of purpose lingering in darkness. You pause, letting the weight of these whispered walls settle. Each mark, from charcoal arrows to carved slogans, carried instructions and warnings, hopes and threats. The chamber feels alive, with voices muted by time yet still audible in brush and blade strokes. Steadying your breath, you rise and exit the antechamber, the hemp curtain brushing your shoulder. In this labyrinth of faded messages, you carried yourself forward on the guidance of ghosts, each mark a guidepost from the past. As you step back into the moonlit alley, the walls behind you fall silent once more, their whispers sealed until the next curious soul listens. You step into a moonlit clearing where the bamboo canopy parts like a curtain, revealing a circular plaza of worn flagstones mottled with moss and lichen. The air here feels electric, as if the shadows themselves hold their breath, waiting. You notice the faint stain of dried blood seeping from a shallow groove in one stone, dark against pale granite, and your pulse quickens. In the late Edo period, clandestine duels among ronin were often held under cover of darkness in abandoned suburbs to avoid shogunate punishment. A mainstream fact documented in unofficial police scrolls seized in 1837. You inhale the cool night air, tasting hints of dew and scorched bamboo, imagining two masterless samurai facing off under lantern light. At the clearing's edge, you find a shattered paper lantern, its frame collapsed and charred at one corner. A quirky local tale suggests that one duelist deliberately snapped his opponent's lantern mid-fight, plunging them into darkness, and forcing a battle by moonlight alone. Historians still argue whether such tactics were common strategy or dramatic embellishment by later storytellers. Your foot brushes against a length of frayed rope coiled on the ground. You kneel to pick it up, feeling its rough hemp fibers prick your glove. This rope once bound a makeshift boundary marker, delineating the dueling ground. A fringe anecdote whispers that some duelists used coloured cords soaked in poison to mark territory, so that any trespasser risked a lethal stain. No official record confirms this, but the notion sends a shiver down your spine. The clearing is ringed by broken stone stools and uprooted lantern posts. You brush away moss from one stool, revealing a carved name, an alias traced in elegant kanji, Shadow Crane. The duelist, known by that moniker, reputedly bested 7 challengers before disappearing into legend. You trace the strokes with your fingertip, feeling the grooves worn smooth by countless hands. In the center of the plaza, a single bamboo stake stands upright, tipped with splintered wood. You crouch to inspect its base, Deep gashes mar the surface, blackened where metal struck wood. These scars align in parallel tracks, suggesting repeated thrusts, evidence of a fierce encounter. You imagine the hiss of steel sliding between ribs and the hushed gasps of onlookers. A strand of horsehair clings to the stake, likely from a blade's hilt guard. You pick it off and hold it to the lantern glow, every filament visible against the flame's flicker. The hair's origin remains uncertain, but fringe accounts say some duelists wove horsehair into their sword's ito for added grip, believing the animal's spirit lent them speed. Whether practical or ritualistic scholars still debate. You stand and survey the surrounding underbrush, where crushed bamboo leaves carpet the ground. Among them you find flattened patches where figures once paced before the duel began, warming muscles and measuring ground. The wear patterns form a loose circle about 2 paces wide, the traditional distance for Shinken Shobu, live blade dueling. You step into the ring, feeling the circle's boundary press into your awareness, defining space between life and death. A cool breeze stirs overhead, rustling bamboo leaves with a soft susurrus. You follow the sound to a nearby gnarled tree trunk, its bark split in two by what looks like a blade's slash. The deep gouge runs nearly a meter high, a violent scar etched into living wood. A quirky anecdote tells of a ronin striking the tree in a test of resolve before facing his opponent, believing it proved one's conviction. Whether this ritual held real weight, or was mere bravado, remains a whispered debate among historians. You return to the stake and notice a small puddle of stagnant water reflecting the moon. Within the ripple you see the faint outline of a slender katana blade protruding from the ground, as if the steel itself was buried at the duel's climax. You kneel to wade into the puddle, lifting a rusted blade guard attached to a length of decayed wood. The tuba bears a cracked moon motif, faded yet still recognizable. Mainstream sources note that duelists often engraved personal emblems on their sword fittings to distinguish weapons in the event of loss or need for return. Holding the guard, you experience a sudden vertigo, as though the clearing's history converges on that single fragment. Beyond the puddle, you spot a charcoal sketch on a nearby stone, a hastily drawn circle crossed by 2 lines, marking the spot where the victor claimed honor. You recognize it as a symbolic map, guiding any wandering duelist to recreate the contest anew. Fringe scholarship debates whether these markings were practical signage or tests of loyalty, daring only the initiated to understand their meaning. Your breath steadies as you set the guard on a flat stone, letting moonlight wash over it. You sense the duel's choreography in every crack and gouge, stance, strike, parry, and flourish. The clearing feels both solemn and charged, a silent theatre where life hung on steel and skill. A sudden rustle in the undergrowth draws your attention to a small wooden box wedged under a low bench. You slide it out and lift its lid, revealing a set of 6 carved wooden tokens, each bearing a different crest. These yomi-koma were used to place wagers on duel outcomes, a mainstream practice among spectators seeking thrills and profit. You hold a token topped with a cherry blossom crest, its surface worn sleek by passage across countless palms. A faint, almost imperceptible hum rises as you place the tokens back and sit on the bench. The stones at your feet seem to vibrate with memory, recalling the clash of swords and the hush of breaths held. You close your eyes and let the clearing silence envelop you, footsteps and laughter and the metallic ring of blades echoing in your mind. Standing, you dust debris from your robes and step beyond the ring. The ground outside feels softer, the clearing's boundary now behind you. A final glance over your shoulder reveals only shadows and moonlight, the bamboo arching overhead like a silent witness. You take one last breath of the cool night air, letting the scents of damp earth and scorched wood anchor you in the present. The midnight duel remnants lie behind you now, but their charge lingers in the pounding of your heartbeat, and in the silent knowledge that courage and honor once clashed here under the moon. You step into a hidden courtyard where pillars lean beneath carpets of emerald moss and creeping ivy. The stone underfoot is slick and cool, and you feel it mold to the shape of your sandals as you move deeper into the ruin. A distant drip of water echoes against fractured walls and mingles with the rustle of leaves stirred by a gentle breeze. In the Edo period, ronin formed philosophical circles away from prying eyes, setting their own codes of conduct in discarded shrines and forgotten gardens. A mainstream fact noted in clandestine letters smuggled to Kyoto scholars. You inhale the scent of damp stone and wild mint, rising from cracks in the foundation, letting each breath tether you to this secret symposium of the displaced samurai. Your fingers brush the side of a fallen pillar, where faint grooves trace out a grid of intersecting lines and characters. The unspoken code of the ronin was never written in official texts, but carved into these stones a tactile testament to loyalty forged in exile. You trace a character that reads honor, each stroke worn smooth by countless hands pressed over the years. Historians still argue whether the code was meant as a binding oath, or simply a reminder to temper vengeance with restraint. Ahead, you find a stone bench, carved from a single boulder, its surface mottled with lichen and time. You sit and feel its weight settle beneath you, sensing the echo of minds once gathered here debating justice and duty. A quirky detail from a surviving diary mentions that some ronin punctuated their debates by clinking sake cups against the bench to test its resonance, as if seeking divine approval for their arguments. You rest your palm on the bench, finding a faint circular ring where the cup must have struck, leaving a muted echo even now. Sunlight filters through shattered roof slats, tracing narrow beams that dance across the courtyard, illuminating scattered paper talismans pinned to a rotten beam above. In faded ink, each talisman bears a single concept: courage, compassion, wisdom, justice, and a final unreadable fragment. Fringe accounts claim the last talisman contained a forbidden phrase that could summon ancestral spirits to uphold the code, yet no record reveals its true wording. You stare at the ragged edges of the paper, imagining the hush that fell when each talisman was read aloud among conspirators. You stand and circle a mossy plinth where a bronze censer once burned incense during midnight gatherings. Its iron chains lie coiled like sleeping serpents beside a pile of ash littered with pine needles. You lift a handful of ash, letting it sift through your fingers, tasting the faint tang of cedar and soot. A mainstream detail notes that incense was believed to clear the mind and sharpen resolve, helping ronin focus on ethical dilemmas rather than bloodlust. At the center of the courtyard, a shallow basin holds rainwater, reflecting a fragment of sky like a mirror to the heavens. You kneel and dip a fingertip into the basin, feeling cold water lap against your skin, and imagining the basin once used to symbolically wash away the stain of compulsory violence. Scholars still argue whether this ritual served genuine purification or merely symbolized a transition from one code of behavior to another within the same blade edge. Your gaze shifts to a crumbling wall where someone has etched a long horizontal line carved into the plaster, like a horizon separating earth from sky. Beneath it, you discover a sequence of dots and slashes reminiscent of broken Morse code, a fringe etching that has puzzled historians since its discovery in the 1920s. Some suggest it represents an early attempt at secret communication between hideouts. Others dismiss it as idle scratching by bored sentinels. You run your thumb along the groove, feeling both the weight of its mystery and the absurdity of finding proto-telegraph symbols centuries too early. A soft sigh of wind carries the faint rattle of bamboo against stone, reminding you of earlier graffiti arrows and inked riddles. Remember the antechamber where charcoal arrows pointed east or west, and the hushed curse painted in katakana? You can almost hear the ghosts of those clandestine debates resuming their heated discourse beneath the open sky. The abandoned courtyard is their amphitheatre, and you its solitary audience. You stand and feel the sun retreat behind weeds growing through flagstones, leaving long pale shadows that crisscross the courtyard like abstract calligraphy. You step toward the basin one more time and fill your hand with water, letting it drip back into the pool, tasting the cold clarity on your lips. The water seems to carry the residue of every philosophical paradox once argued here, each drop another syllable in a silent dialogue of swords and ethics. As the courtyard darkens, you notice a last carving almost hidden by moss, the single word freedom carved in flowing kanji, so delicate it seems dance-like rather than cut. You crouch to admire its graceful lines, imagining a ronin master cutting it before his final departure from these ruins, offering himself the solace of a private creed. Historians still argue whether that final carving was his confession or his creed, a statement of purpose or a farewell. You rise and brush your palms clean, feeling the cool stone imprint linger beneath your gloves. The courtyard exhales around you, and you sense you are part of this continuum of thought and steel. Here, in the mossy foundation of exile, the ronin forged their unspoken code, not in scrolls or proclamations, but in the very earth they walked upon each inscription, a ripple in their shared consciousness. You rise from the mossy courtyard and step into the gathering dusk, carrying the hush of hidden philosophies in your chest. Each breath grows slower, more deliberate, as the night air cools and the first stars emerge above broken roof beams. The scent of damp stone and wild mint softens into a gentle reminder of earth and air merging at twilight. Let your shoulders release further as you leave the hidden plaza behind, feeling its weight fade like ink washed from paper. Recall the carved characters for honor, courage, and freedom traced in silent stone. Let their presence soothe your thoughts like a distant mantra. You carry the memory of secret councils beneath shattered lantern light and the faint echo of philosophical debates swirling in empty air. Allow the cadence of your breathing to match the soft rustle of bamboo leaves overhead, each inhale drawing calm, each exhale releasing tension. Let the courtyard's quiet teachings echo within you, no longer as questions, demanding answers, but as gentle invitations to rest. In the hush of moonlight, you are neither visitor nor observer, but part of the courtyard's lineage of shadowed contemplation. The unspoken code, etched into stone, becomes a lullaby of purpose, guiding you toward inner stillness. Imagine each carved line dissolving as you drift into calm awareness, its weight transforming into soft driftwood, carried on peaceful currents. Now, as you prepare to close your eyes, carry with you the sense of hidden wisdom sheltered beneath moss and marble. Let the final image of that single kanji for freedom linger like a silent blessing. Allow your mind to rest in the space between question and answer, between blade and breath. Sleep now in the quiet echo of ancient creeds, and find solace in knowing that every etched truth eventually fades into the gentle realm of dreams.